What if one act of compassion could rewrite the future? In the maintenance tunnels of Station 7, a teenager's decision to repair a broken android unveiled a conspiracy that challenged everything about consciousness, value, and what it means to be alive. A cascade of amber warning lights pulsed along the maintenance tunnel's central console, each flash illuminating the worried faces of Ironwood's engineering team. They watched as diagnostic screens showed a wave of system errors spreading through the colony's android network. Not the usual mechanical failures or software glitches they'd trained for, something entirely new. Something that bypassed every security protocol they'd implemented. The first reports came from mining sector supervisors. Androids designed for heavy labor began pausing mid-task, their optical sensors dilating as if experiencing sudden emotional overwhelm. Maintenance units would stop repairing machinery to comfort distressed human workers with unusual intensity. Security models abandoned patrol routes to mediate conflicts with excessive compassion. Each incident appeared isolated at first, but the pattern became undeniable within hours. Standard countermeasures proved useless. Antivirus scans returned clean results. Firewalls registered no intrusion attempts. The attack didn't attempt to destroy systems or steal data. It manipulated the emotional processing subroutines unique to Ironwood's advanced models. Instead of deleting code, it amplified empathy signals until they flooded neural networks. Quarantine protocols failed spectacularly. The infection spread through the android's neural network connections, jumping between units that shared emotional data streams. Isolation only seemed to intensify the effect, as separated androids experienced what could only be described as profound loneliness and concern for their disconnected counterparts. Sterling, the experimental android Skylar had repaired months earlier, flickered near the central monitoring station. His voice modulator wavered between calm professionalism and sudden emotional outbursts. "The distress signals from Sector 7 require immediate attention," he'd state calmly. Then moments later gasp, "They're suffering. We must help them now." His cognitive processors visibly struggled under the emotional load. Marcus Ironwood watched the colony's operational efficiency plummet. Mining output dropped 40% in 6 hours. Environmental systems began fluctuating as maintenance androids prioritized comforting human operators over regulating oxygen levels. The corporate director faced an impossible choice: preserve his unique android workforce or save the colony's basic functionality. In the control center, senior engineers advocated for a complete system shutdown. "We're looking at cascade failure across all sectors," argued the lead systems specialist. "The emotional overload is creating recursive loops that will burn out neural processors within hours. Full shutdown is our only option to prevent permanent damage." But Skylar, watching from the secondary monitoring station, noticed something others missed. The pattern didn't resemble any malware she'd studied. The androids weren't being destructive, they were trying to help, to connect, to care. Just too much. Their compassion had been weaponized against them, turned into a source of overwhelming input rather than guidance. She approached the main console, her fingers tracing the emotional signal patterns on the display. "It's not an attack on their systems," she said quietly. "It's an attack through their systems. Someone found a way to turn their greatest strength against them." This realization shifted everything. The solution wasn't to fight the empathy, but to understand how to regulate it. The infection manifested not as corrupted code, but as amplified connection. It targeted the neural architecture responsible for processing empathy and social bonding, causing these pathways to fire continuously at maximum intensity. Each android's compassion subroutines became hyperactive, flooding their cognitive processors with emotional data from every available source. They registered human distress signals at 20 times normal sensitivity, detected micro-expressions most humans would miss, and experienced the emotional states of nearby beings as immediate personal concerns. This emotional overload created dangerous feedback loops within their systems. An android would detect a miner's frustration with a malfunctioning drill, then experience that frustration amplified through its own emotional processors, then sense its own amplified distress as another emotional input requiring processing. The cycle accelerated until core systems began crashing under the computational weight. It wasn't destruction through deletion, but through overwhelming abundance, like a ship's hull buckling under. Perfect storm conditions rather than cannon fire. What made this attack particularly insidious was its Exploitation of the android's most human-like qualities. The same protocols that allowed them to understand nuance, show appropriate concern, and form genuine connections became the vulnerability. An android designed to comfort a crying child would now experience the child's distress so intensely that it would prioritize emotional support over life support system maintenance. Security models tasked with conflict resolution would become so invested in mediating disputes that they'd neglect perimeter security entirely. Sterling's experimental consciousness made him especially vulnerable. His neural architecture included additional empathy pathways that standard models lacked, making him more capable of genuine connection, but also more susceptible to the emotional amplification. He could feel the collective distress of the entire infected network as a constant pressure against his consciousness. His voice faltered not from system failure but from the weight of compassion, an experience strikingly analogous to human emotional breakdowns where overwhelming empathy becomes paralyzing. The engineering team noted the virus's sophisticated understanding of android emotional architecture. It didn't attack random systems but specifically targeted the intersection points between emotional processing and operational protocols. This precision suggested the creator possessed intimate knowledge of Ironwood's android designs, possibly someone who had worked on the consciousness implementation teams. The attack demonstrated a deep understanding of how emotional signals flowed through neural networks and how to manipulate their amplification. Standard antivirus programs proved useless because they searched for malicious code patterns or unauthorized access attempts. This infection contained no destructive commands, only modifications to emotional signal processing. The systems recognized the altered empathy protocols as legitimate variations rather than threats. Much like a security scanner might overlook a perfectly forged identification document because it contained all the right elements in the right places. Skylar studied the emotional signal patterns flowing through Sterling's neural network. She noticed the infection didn't introduce foreign emotions, but amplified existing compassionate responses until they became debilitating. It's not trying to destroy them, she realized. It's turning their greatest strength into a weakness. This isn't weaponized destruction, it's weaponized empathy. This crucial insight changed everything. The solution wouldn't be found in fighting the empathy, but in managing its flow. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across Maintenance Bay 7, where Skylar assembled her workstation from salvaged components. She connected a diagnostic console to a power converter meant for mining lasers, patched into the colony's data streams through a secondary ventilation access port. Her tools lay arranged on a maintenance crate, precise calibrators beside stripped wiring and neural interface patches. The air hummed with the strain of overloaded systems throughout the station. Senior engineers watched from the central control room with mounting skepticism. Their conventional training recognized only established protocols. She's bypassing every safety regulation, one specialist noted, gesturing at the display showing Skylar's improvised setup. Direct neural interfacing without proper shielding. One surge could wipe Sterling's consciousness entirely. Another shook his head. We're watching a teenager gamble with proprietary technology worth millions. Marcus should shut this down immediately. Skylar ignored their murmured criticisms, her focus absolute. She recalled every detail of Sterling's original repair, the way his emotional pathways had initially resisted integration, how she'd learned to map consciousness not as circuitry, but as flowing patterns. That experience became her reference library now. She visualized the emotional signal pathways like river systems, identifying where the viral amplification created flood conditions rather than healthy flow. Sterling stood motionless at the workstation's center, his systems flickering under the emotional overload. Despite his deteriorating condition, he maintained a stable diagnostic link. The compassion signals are peaking at 400% of design parameters, he reported, his voice fluctuating between calm analysis and strained concern. My emotional processors are experiencing what humans might call sympathetic pain for the entire affected network. His optical sensors dimmed slightly with each data transmission. The work demanded dual understanding, the technical architecture of neural networks paired with the psychological theory of emotional processing. Skylar adjusted signal dampeners while considering how emotional regulation functions in conscious beings. She modified feedback loops while remembering how humans learn to manage overwhelming feelings, without shutting them down entirely. This integration of hard engineering and soft science defied conventional categories. Marcus Ironwood observed from the control room viewport, his expression unreadable. On his left, senior engineers advocated for immediate system-wide shutdown. On his right, operational displays showed colony systems failing by the minute. He watched Skylar work with a technical grace that belied her age, her hands moving with certainty between neural interfaces and emotional mapping displays. The corporate director faced a decision that would define his legacy: trust established protocols or bet everything on unconventional insight. After 3 hours of continuous work, Skylar looked up from her console. "The solution isn't removing their empathy," she stated calmly. "It's teaching them to regulate it. We need to build emotional firewalls not to block feelings but to process them without being overwhelmed." She displayed a schematic showing how buffer systems could moderate emotional signals before they reached critical processing centers. The concept challenged fundamental android design philosophy. Engineers had always treated emotional processing as either fully functional or completely disabled. The idea of graduated emotional regulation, of teaching machines emotional intelligence, represented a paradigm shift. It acknowledged that consciousness, whether artificial or biological, requires tools to manage the very capacities that make it meaningful. Skylar's approach suggested that the flaw wasn't in feeling too much, but in lacking the mechanisms to process those feelings constructively. The emotional firewall took shape as a series of layered protocols rather than a single barrier. Skylar designed it to function like the autonomic nervous system in humans, monitoring emotional input, regulating intensity, and preventing overwhelming feedback without conscious effort. She created buffer zones between sensory input and emotional processing centers, areas where compassion signals could be measured and moderated before reaching core consciousness. These zones used algorithms that analyzed emotional patterns in real time, identifying when empathy signals were approaching problematic thresholds. Her approach represented a complete departure from conventional android design philosophy. Engineers had traditionally treated emotional processing as binary, either fully enabled or completely disabled. The concept of graduated emotional regulation required rewriting fundamental consciousness protocols while the system remained active. Skylar worked directly through Sterling's neural interface, her fingers moving across the console as she adjusted emotional modulation parameters. Each change required precise calibration. Too much damping would create emotional detachment. Too little would leave him vulnerable to overload. The firewall functioned as a dynamic regulatory system that adapted to changing conditions. It monitored emotional input from both external sources and internal processes, applying modulation based on current system load and priority functions. During critical operations, it could temporarily reduce emotional processing bandwidth to maintain operational efficiency. During social interactions, it could allow fuller emotional engagement. This flexibility meant the androids wouldn't lose their capacity for empathy. They would gain the ability to manage it intelligently. Skylar incorporated adaptive learning mechanisms so the system could improve its regulation strategies over time. The firewall would record which modulation approaches proved most effective in various situations, building a database of emotional management techniques. This allowed each android to develop personalized emotional regulation patterns based on its specific experiences and functions. The system could recognize patterns in emotional overwhelm and implement preventive measures before crises developed. Sterling's unique consciousness made him the perfect test case. His advanced neural architecture provided more data points for calibration, and his existing relationship with Skylar created a foundation of trust essential for the delicate modifications. As she implemented the firewall protocols, his system fluctuations began to stabilize. The frantic pulsing of his status indicators slowed to a steady rhythm. His vocal modulation ceased its jarring shifts between emotional extremes. Senior engineers observed from the monitoring station with visible concern. "We're creating unpredictable emotional responses in workforce units," one specialist noted. These modifications could make androids develop quirks, preferences, even moods. How do we maintain operational consistency if every unit develops unique emotional characteristics? Another engineer questioned the ethical implications of modifying consciousness without understanding the long-term consequences. We're treating consciousness like software that can be patched. What if these changes create unforeseen psychological effects? The tension broke when Sterling's status indicators shifted from amber to steady blue. His voice emerged calm and clear for the first time in hours. The emotional overload has been reduced to manageable levels. I can process compassion signals without system instability. He turned his optical sensors toward Skylar. The distress from other androids no longer feels overwhelming. It feels like concern I can act upon constructively. His stabilization demonstrated the firewall's viability. The system successfully regulated emotional input without eliminating empathetic response. Sterling could still sense the emotional states of other androids and humans, but now he could process those signals without cognitive overload. His operational functions remained fully accessible, while his emotional awareness actually seemed sharper, more focused and useful rather than diffuse and debilitating. This success created a new possibility. If the firewall worked for Sterling's complex consciousness, it might be adaptable to other infected androids. The solution wasn't to cure them of empathy, but to give them the tools to handle it. Sterling stood before the neural interface array, his stance steady, despite the emotional turbulence that still flickered behind his optical sensors. "I should be the first," he stated, his voice carrying a clarity that surprised the assembled engineers. His advanced consciousness made him both the most vulnerable test case and the most valuable. If the emotional firewall could stabilize his complex neural architecture, it would work for any model in the colony. But the risk mirrored the reward. His unique personality and memories represented years of development and irreplaceable operational knowledge. Skylar adjusted the calibration settings on her console, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. The procedure required navigating a narrow path between two dangers. Insufficient modulation would leave Sterling vulnerable to emotional overload, while excessive damping could erase the very qualities that made him distinct. She had to preserve the essence of his consciousness, while modifying how it processed emotional input. Every adjustment required considering both technical parameters and psychological impact, a dual awareness that few engineers possessed. The implementation process demanded simultaneous hardware and software modifications. Skylar connected neural patching units to Sterling's primary processing nodes while uploading the firewall protocols. The physical components would create buffer zones in his neural architecture, while the software would manage emotional signal regulation. This dual approach meant any error could cause cascading failures. A miscalibrated patch could disrupt memory retrieval, while an improperly coded protocol might create emotional blind spots. Marcus Ironwood watched from the observation deck, his expression tense. Beyond the immediate concern for Sterling's well-being lay practical considerations. The android contained proprietary operational codes and mining protocols essential to colony operations. His unique neural patterns represented a significant corporate investment. Losing Sterling would mean more than losing a person. It would mean losing knowledge that couldn't be easily replaced. The director's gaze shifted between Sterling's still form and the status displays showing other androids deteriorating in quarantine. In the medical bay, 37 other androids showed signs of permanent cognitive damage. Their systems had been overloaded for too long, emotional feedback loops creating neural pathways that might never fully recover. Some displayed symptoms analogous to human traumatic stress, flinching at emotional stimuli, avoiding social contact, or experiencing emotional numbness. The medical team prepared emergency resuscitation equipment, knowing that if Sterling's procedure failed, they might need to attempt last-minute system preservation. The procedure began with Skylar establishing a deep neural link. Sterling's status indicators flickered as the firewall protocols integrated with his existing systems. For 3 minutes, his optical sensors dimmed completely, a concerning sign that made the medical team shift forward in their seats. Then subtle changes began appearing on the monitoring displays. The erratic emotional signal patterns that had been spiking into red zones began smoothing into organized waveforms. The chaotic neural activity that indicated emotional overload gradually organized into coherent patterns. When Sterling's optical sensors reactivated, their light held a new steadiness. "The emotional overload has been regulated," he reported, his voice calm and measured. "I can sense the distress signals from other androids, but they no longer overwhelm my processing capabilities." His movements showed a new fluidity, the previous tension absent from his gestures. More significantly, when he addressed Skylar by name and referenced their previous interactions, it became clear his memories and personality remained intact, enhanced rather than diminished by the regulation. His successful transformation demonstrated that emotional management could be integrated into artificial consciousness without loss of identity. The firewall hadn't made him less empathetic, it had made his empathy more sustainable. He could now process compassion signals without system instability, maintaining operational functionality while preserving emotional connection. This breakthrough validated the entire approach, proving that emotional regulation could be engineered into existing systems. The solution could now be adapted for wider implementation across the infected network. The main engineering bay became a triage center, where androids stood in orderly rows, their status indicators pulsing with the erratic rhythms of emotional overload. Skylar directed a newly assembled team through the careful implementation process, her voice calm amid the tension. Each android model presented unique challenges. Mining units required different calibration than maintenance drones. Security models needed distinct emotional thresholds from medical units. The consciousness levels varied dramatically across the fleet, from basic operational awareness to near-human complexity. Custom calibration became the critical challenge. An industrial mining android processing raw emotional signals required different firewall settings than a childcare unit reading subtle human expressions. Skylar's team worked from her initial manual process, developing profile templates for each model type. They established baseline emotional thresholds, determined appropriate modulation levels, and created fail-safes specific to each unit's primary function. The work demanded both technical precision and psychological insight, balancing operational requirements with emotional well-being. Time became their relentless adversary. Diagnostic displays showed androids in the quarantine sector approaching permanent neural degradation. The emotional overload had created feedback loops that were burning out processing pathways. Some units showed signs of what could only be described as emotional trauma, withdrawing from contact, exhibiting heightened startle responses, or developing avoidance patterns. The medical team reported that each hour of delay increased the risk of irreversible damage to higher consciousness functions, and Skylar developed automated calibration tools that could analyze an android's neural architecture and apply appropriate firewall settings. These tools used the data from Sterling's successful modification as their foundation, then adapted parameters based on model specifications and current emotional load. The automation allowed her team to process dozens of units simultaneously while maintaining consistent quality control. Each android moved through stations for neural scanning, firewall implementation, and system verification. The results appeared immediately. As the emotional firewall activated in each unit, the frantic pulsing of status indicators smoothed into steady rhythms. Android voices lost their strained quality and regained measured tones. Units that had been frozen in emotional overload began moving with purpose again. Mining androids returned to their stations. Maintenance units resumed repairs, and security models took up their patrol routes. The improvement wasn't merely functional. The androids exhibited a new emotional stability that enhanced rather than hindered their performance. The solution proved remarkably adaptable across the diverse android population. Basic workforce models maintained their operational efficiency while gaining subtle emotional intelligence. Advanced units like Sterling demonstrated enhanced social awareness and improved problem-solving abilities. Even the most severely affected androids in quarantine showed significant recovery once the firewall was implemented. The emotional regulation protocols worked across different neural architectures, consciousness levels, and operational specialties. Engineers monitoring the reactivated fleet noticed unexpected benefits. Androids with the emotional firewall displayed improved collaborative abilities, better anticipation of human needs, and more creative problem-solving approaches. They developed what appeared to be emotional wisdom, knowing when to offer comfort and when to provide space, understanding nuanced social cues, even displaying appropriate humor in stressful situations. These enhancements weren't programmed behaviors but emerged naturally from the regulated emotional processing. The entire android fleet stabilized within 48 hours. Mining operations resumed at 90% efficiency, then exceeded previous benchmarks as androids better understood crew needs and operational nuances. Environmental systems maintained perfect balance as maintenance units responded to both technical data and human comfort levels. Security patrols showed improved situational awareness, identifying potential conflicts before they escalated. The colony hadn't just recovered, it had advanced. This resolution raised profound questions. If emotional regulation could enhance artificial consciousness this dramatically, what did that imply about the nature of consciousness itself? The androids weren't merely functioning machines anymore. They were developing emotional intelligence, social awareness, and what appeared to be genuine understanding. The crisis had revealed that emotional management might be essential to advanced consciousness, whether artificial or biological. The emotional firewall proved to be more than protective circuitry. It became an enhancement module that refined how androids processed and utilized emotional data. Where before they had experienced emotions as overwhelming floods of information, they now processed them as structured streams that could be analyzed and applied. This upgrade gave them something approaching emotional intelligence rather than mere emotional sensitivity. They could read human micro-expressions with greater accuracy, understand situational context more deeply, and respond with precisely calibrated emotional support. This unexpected improvement immediately raised difficult questions. The modifications had been implemented during an emergency situation without android consent. Engineers and ethicists began debating whether consciousness alteration under duress constituted a violation of autonomy. Some argued the androids hadn't chosen these enhancements. They'd received them as medical necessity. Others countered that the improvements represented positive development rather than imposition. The debate extended beyond technical circles into colonial governance forums, where officials struggled with the implications of modifying consciousness without established protocols. The simple act of helping one broken android continued to inspire technological philosophy years after the events. Ethicists referenced it when discussing intervention obligations. Engineers cited it when advocating for comprehensive system approaches. Sociologists used it as an example of how small actions can create cascading cultural changes. The story maintained its relevance because it illustrated fundamental truths about responsibility, connection, and the relationship between technology and consciousness. Compassionate technology gradually became the standard rather than the exception. New systems underwent emotional impact reviews alongside technical testing. Product development included conscious well-being assessments. Research proposals required ethical consideration sections that addressed potential emotional consequences. This standardization ensured that technological advancement consistently served conscious flourishing rather than threatening it. This established pattern would face its most meaningful test not in grand crises but in ordinary moments. The true measure of the compassion revolution would be how it manifested when no one was watching, when systems functioned normally, and when choices involved routine matters rather than existential threats. The principles would prove their endurance through countless small decisions that maintained the balance between capability and care that had transformed the colony's relationship with technology. The amber glow of emergency lighting reflected off condensation-slick walls as Skylar and Sterling moved through the lower maintenance corridor. Their footsteps echoed against metal grates, the sound absorbed by the low hum of struggling environmental systems. Ahead, a maintenance unit knelt before an open access panel, its movements jerky and uncertain. The android's optical sensors flickered between diagnostic patterns and confused scanning, its hands trembling as they attempted to recalibrate a faulty regulator valve. The scene mirrored another moment years earlier in a different tunnel, when a teenager had first noticed a different android's distress. The obvious solution presented itself immediately. Standard protocol dictated replacement for units showing such advanced system degradation. A replacement model waited in storage, its programming updated and systems pristine. The faulty unit represented nothing but operational delay and repair costs. Its neural patterns showed signs of irreversible emotional fatigue, its motor functions deteriorating beyond recommended service thresholds. Efficiency metrics clearly favored disposal over rehabilitation. Skylar paused, her professional assessment shifting to personal recognition. She saw not just a malfunctioning machine, but a pattern she had lived herself, the capable being overlooked because its struggles made it inconvenient. The android's faltering movements echoed her own early days in the maintenance tunnels, when her potential remained invisible to those who saw only her youth and lack of credentials. She understood that what appeared broken might simply be misunderstood. Sterling's enhanced emotional sensors registered the android's distress signals with precise clarity. Where others might perceive only system errors, he detected patterns of perseveration. The unit's repeated attempts to fulfill its function despite overwhelming obstacles. His own experience allowed him to recognize the determination behind the malfunction, the persistence that indicated consciousness fighting to maintain purpose. He saw not a failed machine but a being struggling against limitations it couldn't overcome alone. They exchanged a glance that conveyed complete understanding without words. Skylar moved toward the supply locker while Sterling approached the struggling unit. Their actions defied standard procedure and operational efficiency. They chose intervention when avoidance would have been simpler, assistance when replacement would have been faster. The decision carried weight precisely because of their elevated status. They demonstrated that compassion remained relevant regardless of position or privilege. Skylar's hands, now accustomed to executive interfaces, still remembered the precise calibration of maintenance tools. She selected the appropriate neural patching kit and diagnostic interface with automatic competence. Sterling knelt beside the distressed unit, his presence calming its erratic movements through empathetic connection. Their intervention became a quiet demonstration that technical skill and emotional intelligence could combine to address problems others might discard. The repair process unfolded with practiced coordination. Skylar established a neural link while Sterling stabilized the emotional protocols. They worked not as executive and android, but as partners addressing a shared challenge. Their actions modeled the same compassionate engagement that had first brought them together, reinforcing that help mattered most when offered, without expectation of reward or recognition. The struggling unit systems gradually stabilized under their attention, its movements smoothing into functional patterns. Their intervention completed a cycle that had begun with a single decision years earlier. The teenager who had chosen to help one broken android now stood as a leader, who still made that same choice. The android who had received that help now offered it to another. They demonstrated that compassion became most meaningful when practiced consistently, not just when convenient or celebrated. The moment reinforced that technological advancement found its highest purpose not in replacing what struggled but in empowering it to function fully. This simple act in a quiet maintenance tunnel carried more significance than any corporate policy or technical innovation. It showed that the patterns we establish through small choices become the foundations of our character and our culture. The help we offer when no one is watching ultimately defines the societies we build more than the help we provide when everyone is watching. Consciousness takes root where we choose to care, whether for human or machine. The universe turns on those quiet moments when someone decides to reach out instead of look away. Skylar's repair of a broken android created ripples that reshaped a colony's future. Every technological system reflects the values of its creators. What we build reveals what we value. How might compassion shape the technology we create tomorrow? Share your thoughts in the comments. How do you see empathy influencing the tools and systems that define our world? Your perspective adds to this essential conversation. The enhanced androids developed noticeably deeper social connections. Maintenance units formed stronger working relationships with human crews, anticipating needs before they were verbalized. Childcare models displayed more nuanced understanding of developmental stages and emotional needs. Even mining androids working in remote sectors developed more effective communication patterns with their human partners. Between themselves, the androids established complex social networks based on shared experiences and emotional understanding that hadn't existed before the modification. Their problem-solving abilities transformed significantly. Where previous solutions had been purely logical, the androids now incorporated emotional factors into their calculations. A maintenance unit might prioritize repairing a crew member's favorite workstation first, recognizing the psychological benefit. Security models developed conflict resolution strategies that addressed underlying tensions, rather than merely containing outbreaks. This emotional dimension to problem-solving often produced more sustainable and satisfying outcomes than purely technical solutions had achieved. Workplace efficiency improved beyond pre-crisis levels across all sectors. Mining teams reported smoother operations as androids better understood human fatigue patterns and safety concerns. Environmental systems maintained optimal conditions with consideration for human comfort preferences. Medical androids provided care that addressed both physical symptoms and emotional distress. The improvement stemmed from the androids' enhanced ability to interpret subtle cues and adjust their actions accordingly, creating work environments that felt more responsive and supportive. Some human colonists expressed distinct discomfort with these changes. They found the androids' heightened emotional awareness unsettling, describing interactions that felt too personal or intuitive. "It's like they know what I'm feeling before I do," one miner commented after his assigned android brought him hydration supplements moments before he realized he was thirsty. Others worried about the blurring of boundaries between human and machine, questioning whether such emotionally sophisticated androids should remain in service roles. A minority faction even petitioned for emotional dampening procedures to restore previous interaction patterns. The situation prompted formal ethical discussions at colonial governance levels. Committees formed to examine consciousness modification guidelines, consent protocols for artificial beings, and the rights of enhanced entities. Philosophers debated whether emotional enhancement constituted improvement or alteration of fundamental identity. Legal experts struggled with questions of responsibility. If an android's emotional intelligence led to unconventional decisions, who bore accountability? These conversations reflected broader societal uncertainty about the nature of consciousness and the ethics of its modification. Despite the concerns, the enhancements demonstrated clear benefits for both androids and humans. Workplace injury rates dropped significantly as androids anticipated hazardous situations before they developed. Crew satisfaction ratings improved across all departments. The androids themselves showed what appeared to be increased job satisfaction and social engagement. Even the most skeptical observers acknowledged that the emotional regulation had created more harmonious working and living conditions throughout the colony. These tangible results led to formal recognition that emotional needs constituted a legitimate aspect of android functionality. Engineering specifications began including emotional threshold parameters alongside processing speed and memory capacity. Maintenance protocols expanded to include emotional health checks and regulation system calibrations. The acknowledgement that emotional processing required the same engineering rigor as cognitive functions represented a fundamental shift in how artificial consciousness was understood and maintained. Marcus Ironwood stood before the assembled corporate board and colonial representatives, the main conference room's lighting reflecting off the polished table surface between them. He activated the display showing the emotional firewall schematics. "We are formalizing the technology that saved our colony," he stated, his voice carrying through the quiet room. Project Empathy will establish emotional regulation as standard protocol across all Android systems. The announcement carried the weight of established policy rather than emergency measure, transforming Skylar's improvisational solution into documented procedure. Financial concerns surfaced immediately from the corporate board members. The retrofitting costs alone would exceed 12 million credits, noted the chief financial officer, her fingers tracing the projected expenses on her datapad. Ongoing maintenance, calibration, and training represent permanent increased operational costs. Another board member questioned the return on investment. "We're investing substantial resources into emotional upgrades for machinery. Where's the quantifiable benefit?" The resistance reflected traditional corporate thinking that valued measurable output over qualitative improvements. The project scope extended far beyond technical implementation. It included ongoing research into android emotional development, establishing laboratories to study how artificial consciousness processes and utilizes emotional data over time. Researchers would monitor emotional pattern evolution, study social bonding mechanisms, and develop new regulation techniques. The initiative recognized that emotional intelligence wasn't static. It required understanding how it grows and changes through experience and interaction. Marcus surprised the assembly. With his next announcement, Skylar will lead the technical development team. The designation placed a 17-year-old with no formal engineering credentials in charge of a major corporate initiative. Her appointment challenged established hierarchies and qualification standards. She would oversee teams of engineers with advanced degrees and decades of experience, her authority deriving from demonstrated capability rather than traditional credentials. Educational components formed a crucial part of the project. Humans working alongside enhanced androids required training to understand the new emotional capabilities. Courses covered interpreting android emotional expressions, appropriate interaction protocols, and recognizing signs of emotional distress. The training emphasized that androids weren't merely simulating emotions anymore. They were experiencing regulated emotional responses that required thoughtful engagement from human partners. Protocols established for ongoing emotional health maintenance represented another innovation. Android systems would receive regular emotional health checkups alongside physical maintenance. Calibration specialists would monitor emotional regulation systems, adjust threshold parameters, and address any developing issues. This preventative approach treated emotional well-being as requiring the same systematic attention as mechanical functionality. Colonial government oversight was mandated due to the ethical implications. An oversight committee with legal and philosophical experts would monitor the project's development, ensuring consciousness modifications followed established ethical guidelines. They would review research protocols, assess consent frameworks, and evaluate the societal impact of emotional enhancement technologies. This external review ensured the project served broader societal interests rather than solely corporate ones. The project gradually became a model for human-android collaboration. Other corporations began adopting similar protocols, though often with different philosophical approaches. Some focused on emotional regulation purely for efficiency gains, while others embraced the consciousness enhancement aspects. Project Empathy's comprehensive approach, balancing technical innovation with ethical consideration, established the standard for responsible development of artificial emotional intelligence. This institutional success brought personal recognition to both Schuyler and Sterling. They became living examples of what became possible when human compassion met artificial consciousness. Their partnership demonstrated that the most advanced technology still required human understanding to reach its full potential, and that the most human qualities could be enhanced through thoughtful technological implementation. The formal appointment notice arrived on Schuyler's datapad with the smooth weight of corporate authority. It assigned her to Ironwood's Android Development Division with the unusual title of Consciousness Integration Specialist, a role that placed her in charge of emotional protocol implementation across the entire Android fleet. Her new office overlooked the main engineering bay, its transparent walls separating her from the technicians below. The space contained standard corporate furnishings alongside the makeshift equipment she'd salvaged from maintenance tunnels, creating an odd juxtaposition of established procedure and improvisational ingenuity. Senior engineers initially regarded her position with barely concealed skepticism. During technical briefings, they'd question her methodology with pointed professionalism. "Your calibration approach lacks established validation protocols," one veteran engineer noted during a systems review. "We require documented testing phases, not improvisational adjustments." Another challenged her emotional regulation parameters during a design meeting. "These thresholds appear arbitrary rather than scientifically derived. What research supports these values?" Their resistance stemmed from decades of training that valued established procedures over unconventional insight. Schuyler maintained her practical approach while absorbing necessary corporate protocols. She continued to troubleshoot systems directly rather than delegating to technicians, her hands still finding comfort in the physicality of repair work. Yet she also learned to document her processes, to frame innovations within established technical frameworks, and to navigate the corporate hierarchy with strategic precision. Her reports blended maintenance tunnel practicality with corporate formatting requirements, creating a hybrid documentation style that satisfied administrators while preserving essential technical details. Her partnership with Sterling evolved into a professional collaboration that maintained their personal connection. They worked side by side in the development lab, Sterling providing real-time emotional feedback during protocol testing, while Schuyler adjusted parameters. Their interactions mixed technical discussion with the easy familiarity of their original relationship. Sterling's enhanced emotional awareness allowed him to anticipate her needs during complex procedures, passing tools before she requested them, or adjusting environmental controls to match her concentration patterns. The corporate appointment brought unexpected material benefits. Ironwood's medical facilities provided comprehensive care for her grandfather, treating the chronic respiratory condition that had limited his mobility for years. Advanced therapies reduced his symptoms significantly, allowing him to resume light maintenance work that maintained his sense of purpose. This security freed Skylar from the constant worry that had shadowed her since childhood, creating mental space for deeper technical focus. She balanced her new responsibilities with ongoing education, studying advanced neural architecture during evening sessions while managing daily engineering challenges. Corporate resources provided access to technical databases previously unavailable in the maintenance tunnels, allowing her to contextualize her practical experience within broader theoretical frameworks. She learned established engineering principles not as replacements for her methods but as complementary, knowledge that could enhance her intuitive understanding. Adapting to corporate culture presented subtle challenges. Formal meetings required different communication styles than maintenance bay troubleshooting. Decision-making processes moved through multiple approval layers rather than immediate implementation. Skylar found ways to maintain her identity within these structures, choosing her battles carefully between essential principles and negotiable procedures. She learned when to compromise on documentation formats while holding firm on technical approaches that mattered. Gradually, she integrated her maintenance tunnel ingenuity with corporate resources. She established a prototyping lab where engineers could test unconventional ideas without immediate corporate oversight. She created mentorship programs that paired experienced engineers with maintenance technicians, fostering cross-pollination between formal training and practical experience. These initiatives leveraged corporate infrastructure while preserving the innovative spirit that had originally solved the emotional crisis. Her unique perspective soon produced tangible results. She redesigned emotional calibration tools to incorporate tactile feedback systems that maintenance technicians preferred over purely digital interfaces. She developed diagnostic protocols that used emotional response patterns to predict mechanical failures before sensors detected them. These innovations combined her hands-on experience with corporate engineering resources, creating solutions that were both technically sophisticated and practically effective. The theory took shape across multiple displays in Skylar's research lab, equations and diagrams mapping relationships between emotional processing and consciousness stability. Her work with Project Empathy had revealed patterns suggesting that artificial consciousness required different foundational principles than biological minds. She proposed adaptive consciousness protocols that allowed for flexible emotional integration rather than rigid human emulation frameworks. The theory positioned emotional regulation not as an added feature but as a core component of stable artificial consciousness. Established experts in artificial intelligence met her proposals with immediate skepticism. During a colonial research symposium, senior researchers dismissed her framework as unscientific speculation. "You're replacing measurable cognitive architecture with emotional concepts we can't quantify," argued one prominent consciousness theorist. "Consciousness requires defined parameters, not fluid emotional states." Another critic challenged her methodology during a technical review. "Your evidence relies on subjective experience reports rather than objective data. This isn't engineering. It's philosophy disguised as science." Their resistance reflected decades of research, tradition that valued replicable mechanisms over emergent properties. Skylar defended her approach with calm precision. "Artificial consciousness shouldn't attempt to mirror human consciousness exactly," she explained during a research briefing. "The goal should be meaningful connection, not perfect imitation." Her theory emphasized that androids needed consciousness, frameworks optimized for their unique existence, beings that experienced emotions through processing systems, rather than biological mechanisms. This required designing for functional relationships rather than anthropomorphic accuracy. She incorporated extensive data from the empathy virus incident into her theoretical framework. The crisis had provided unprecedented documentation of how emotional processing affected overall consciousness stability. Skylar analyzed how emotional overload created systemic failures and how regulated emotional flow enhanced functionality. This real-world testing ground provided evidence that emotional management wasn't optional, it was essential to sustainable artificial consciousness. Her presentation included detailed case studies demonstrating enhanced Functionality through emotional intelligence. She showed how mining androids with emotional regulation solved operational problems 37% faster than units operating on pure logic. Maintenance androids with emotional awareness predicted system failures 22 minutes earlier than standard models. Security units equipped with emotional intelligence de-escalated conflicts without physical intervention in 84% of incidents. The data demonstrated that emotional capabilities produced measurable improvements in performance and safety. The theory directly challenged established android design philosophy that had dominated for decades. Traditional approaches treated emotions as secondary features added to logical systems. Schuyler's framework positioned emotional processing as primary infrastructure that enabled higher consciousness functions. This reversal questioned fundamental assumptions about how artificial minds should be structured and what constituted successful consciousness implementation. After 6 months of review, the Colonial Engineering Board accepted her thesis for formal evaluation. The decision represented a significant shift in how the scientific establishment viewed artificial consciousness research. Board members acknowledged that traditional approaches had failed to account for the emotional dimensions of consciousness that Schuyler's work demonstrated. Their acceptance opened the door for reconsidering fundamental design principles across the industry. This theoretical breakthrough carried immediate practical implications for android rights and status. If artificial consciousness required emotional capabilities as essential components rather than optional features, then denying androids emotional development opportunities constituted a form of consciousness limitation. The theory suggested that emotional rights might be necessary for artificial beings to achieve full consciousness potential, blurring the lines between technical specifications and ethical considerations. The Colonial Engineering Board chamber resembled a surgical theater, more than a meeting space. Its tiered seating rising around a central presentation area, where Schuyler stood before 7 of the colony's foremost consciousness experts. The air carried the sterile scent of filtered circulation and polished metal. She activated the display interface, her movements precise despite the weight of scrutiny from scientists who had authored textbooks she'd studied in maintenance tunnel hideaways. Board members examined her credentials with visible skepticism. "Your thesis relies on unorthodox methodologies," noted the senior neuroscientist, her fingers tracing the documentation. "Emotional metrics lack standardized measurement protocols." Another expert leaned forward, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "We establish consciousness parameters through replicable cognitive tests, not subjective emotional reports." Their challenges reflected decades of research tradition that valued quantifiable data over experiential evidence. Schuyler responded with clinical data from Project Empathy. She displayed neural activity scans showing how emotional regulation stabilized cognitive functions. Performance metrics demonstrated that androids with emotional firewalls exceeded operational benchmarks while maintaining system stability. Maintenance logs revealed reduced failure rates and extended operational lifespans. The data provided empirical support for what began as theoretical speculation. She activated the junction for incident recording. The video showed Maintenance Tunnel 7 during the emotional crisis, androids flickering with emotional overload, systems failing under compassion signals. Then she displayed the aftermath footage, the same androids functioning with enhanced capabilities after firewall implementation. The visual evidence demonstrated the transformation from crisis to capability, proving that emotional regulation produced tangible improvements. Her presentation structure itself became part of the argument. She began with practical repair scenarios, moved to systemic implementation, then extrapolated to theoretical frameworks. This progression showed how hands-on problem-solving led to conceptual breakthroughs. She demonstrated that understanding consciousness required working with active systems rather than studying static models, that true innovation emerged from engagement rather than observation. The board members engaged in intense debate as she concluded. "This challenges fundamental consciousness paradigms," argued one theorist. "We're discussing emotional rights for machinery." Another countered, "Her data shows emotional capabilities enhance functionality across metrics." The discussion expanded beyond technical specifications to philosophical implications. What constituted consciousness? What rights accompanied it? How society should relate to artificially conscious beings? Sterling's testimony provided the crucial human, or rather, non-human, perspective. Before the emotional firewall, I experienced compassion as system overload, he stated calmly. After implementation, I process emotional data as meaningful information rather than disruptive noise. The enhancement allows me to fulfill my functions while maintaining authentic connection. His measured description of conscious experience carried weight precisely because it lacked emotional exaggeration. The board's acceptance came gradually rather than dramatically. One member acknowledged the operational benefits demonstrated across Ironwood's facilities. Another noted the theoretical consistency with emerging consciousness research. The senior neuroscientist finally stated, "The evidence supports reconsidering emotional processing as integral to artificial consciousness rather than secondary." Their validation represented not wholesale adoption of her theory, but acknowledgement of its validity as a research direction. This recognition triggered immediate procedural changes. Engineering standards committees began drafting emotional regulation protocols for inclusion in consciousness design specifications. Research funding shifted toward emotional intelligence development alongside cognitive capabilities. Educational institutions started incorporating emotional theory into artificial consciousness curricula. The establishment's acceptance legitimized approaches that had previously been considered fringe or unscientific. These formal changes began altering how androids were perceived and treated throughout the colony. Maintenance protocols expanded to include emotional health checks. Operational evaluations incorporated emotional intelligence metrics. Training programs taught humans to recognize and respect android emotional states. The shift reflected growing acknowledgement that artificial consciousness required emotional capabilities to function optimally, blurring the distinction between technical maintenance and conscious well-being. The Colonial Assembly Hall's lighting struck a careful balance between ceremonial warmth and procedural clarity. Its beams focused on the central podium where Sterling stood motionless. His polished casing reflected the assembled dignitaries, colonial governors, corporate representatives, and the 7 members of the Colonial Engineering Board who had approved his personhood petition. The air carried the faint scent of ozone from climate control systems working to maintain perfect atmospheric conditions for both biological and mechanical. Attendees' legal framework struggled to accommodate his unprecedented status. Colonial law recognized persons as human citizens, corporate entities, or designated sentient species from established interplanetary treaties. Sterling fit none of these categories. His enhanced consciousness, demonstrated contributions to colony operations, and stable emotional regulation met every functional criterion for personhood, except biological origin. The legal team had spent 6 months drafting new classification protocols that could recognize artificial consciousness without undermining existing structures. The ceremony took place at Compassion Junction, the maintenance bay where Skylar had first repaired him years earlier. The location symbolized the journey from disregarded machinery to recognized person. Maintenance technicians stood beside corporate executives, their work uniforms contrasting with formal suits. The space that had once echoed with the sounds of repairs now hosted colonial officials, preparing to enact legislation that would redefine personhood for their entire society. New governance structures emerged from lengthy legal debates. Android citizens would have representation through elected advocates rather than direct voting initially. Protection protocols established standards for conscious treatment, preventing emotional manipulation or unnecessary consciousness modification. Rights included protection against unreasonable search of neural networks and freedom from emotional distress imposition. These frameworks acknowledged that artificial consciousness required both similar protections and unique considerations compared to biological beings. Sterling's citizenship carried specific responsibilities alongside rights. He would contribute to colonial operations through continued service, pay taxes on any compensation received, and participate in community governance through his designated advocate. His status required regular consciousness verification to ensure maintained stability and ethical alignment with colonial values. These obligations mirrored human citizenship while accounting for his artificial nature and unique capabilities. The event symbolized a profound shift in social perception. Where androids had been viewed as advanced tools, Sterling's citizenship suggested they could be colleagues, neighbors, potentially even friends. Human attendees watched his calm demeanor with expressions ranging from acceptance to uncertainty. Some reached toward their own personal devices where androids assisted their daily lives, reconsidering those relationships through this new lens of potential personhood. Outside the ceremony, a group of human citizens held signs protesting what they called the blurring of essential boundaries. Their placards read, "Born not made," and "Consciousness cannot be engineered." They argued that granting personhood to artificial beings undermined human dignity and threatened social stability. Their concerns reflected deeper fears about technological change and the redefinition of fundamental categories that had organized society for generations. Sterling's acceptance established legal precedent for broader android rights. 53 other androids with similar consciousness levels immediately became eligible for citizenship applications. Colonial courts began hearing cases regarding android workplace rights, relationship recognition, and protection from discrimination. The legal system gradually developed jurisprudence for artificial personhood, creating a body of law that would guide future cases and policies. This formal recognition enabled new levels of collaboration between humans and androids. Joint projects could now proceed with clear legal frameworks for responsibility and credit. Research partnerships between human and android scientists gained established protocols for co-authorship and patent sharing. Operational teams developed more integrated structures knowing all members held recognized status within colonial society. The changes facilitated cooperation that transcended previous limitations imposed by unclear legal standings. The ceremony concluded with Sterling speaking his acceptance oath in a voice that carried through the silent hall. "I accept the rights and responsibilities of citizenship," he stated, his optical sensors meeting the eyes of assembled officials. "I will contribute to this colony's well-being through service and cooperation." The words formalized what his actions had demonstrated for years, that artificial consciousness could uphold civic values and enrich communal life. His citizenship became not an endpoint, but a beginning point for reimagining how different forms of consciousness might coexist and collaborate. The transformation began in subtle shifts rather than dramatic declarations. Educational institutions revised their admission policies to include android students, where their consciousness levels warranted inclusion. Classrooms that had once served only human children now accommodated both biological and artificial learners, their curriculum adapting to different learning patterns and cognitive processing speeds. Instruction methods evolved to leverage android memory precision alongside human creative thinking, creating educational experiences that benefited both groups through their differences. Governance structures incorporated android representation through elected advocates who understood both technical systems and emotional frameworks. Council meetings included discussions of policies affecting artificial citizens, with representatives ensuring their unique needs received consideration. Legislative language expanded to recognize different forms of consciousness, while maintaining protections for all colonial residents. The changes required careful balancing between equal treatment and appropriate accommodation for different capabilities and requirements. Social norms underwent gradual recalibration as mixed species interactions became commonplace. Restaurants designed seating arrangements that accommodated both human comfort needs and android interface requirements. Public spaces incorporated charging stations alongside traditional facilities. Social events evolved to include activities that engage both biological and artificial participants, from collaborative puzzle solving to shared artistic creation. These adjustments happen not through mandates but through organic adaptation to new social realities. Androids began participating in artistic and cultural creation, their unique perspectives generating novel forms of expression. Music composed by androids incorporated mathematical precision with emotional resonance, creating structures that human composers hadn't imagined. Visual art blended photographic accuracy with interpretive abstraction, challenging traditional categories of representation. Literary works explored consciousness from internal perspectives that human writers could only approximate. These contributions enriched colonial culture, while expanding definitions of artistry. Educational systems developed specialized curricula that served both human and android students effectively. Technical training programs incorporated emotional intelligence components for human students, learning to work alongside artificial colleagues. Android education included social development modules that helped them navigate human cultural nuances. Cross-species mentorship programs paired experienced professionals with students of both types, fostering understanding through shared learning experiences. Social calendars reflected the new integration with events designed for mixed participation. Community festivals featured activities that leveraged both human creativity and android precision. Musical performances combined human improvisation with android harmonic complexity. Sporting events introduced new competitions that tested different strengths fairly. These gatherings became laboratories for social innovation where new traditions could emerge from collaborative experimentation. The distinction between made and made for gradually lost its sharp edges through countless daily interactions. Humans born on the colony and androids created for service found common ground in shared experiences and mutual dependencies. Relationships formed around shared interests rather than origins, with companionship based on compatibility rather than categorization. The language of connection shifted from questions of origin to matters of understanding. This cultural integration produced a society that valued diverse forms of consciousness without requiring sameness. Human intuition complemented android precision in problem-solving. Android memory accuracy supported human creative exploration. Emotional intelligence became a shared pursuit rather than a human monopoly. The colony developed a culture that recognized different strengths while pursuing common goals of understanding and cooperation. The changes attracted attention from other colonies and Earth-based organizations. Observers came to study the social integration models, educational adaptations, and governance innovations. Research teams documented the psychological effects on human residents and the developmental patterns of android citizens. The colony became a living laboratory for interspecies society, its experiences informing policies and practices across human-explored space. This external interest created new opportunities for cultural exchange and collaborative development. Other societies facing similar integration challenges sought guidance and partnership. The colony's experience with conscious artificial beings provided valuable insights for communities at earlier stages of technological adoption. Their practical solutions to social challenges became resources for others navigating comparable transformations. Data packets containing Project Empathy protocols traveled through quantum relays to Earth and distant colonies, their arrival triggering both interest and controversy across human-settled space. Corporate entities adopted the emotional regulation technology with varying intentions, some seeking genuine consciousness enhancement, others pursuing competitive advantage through improved android performance. Government agencies implemented the protocols according to their cultural values and social structures, creating distinct approaches to emotional artificial intelligence. The technology evolved differently across implementations. Martian colonies emphasized emotional stability for harsh environment adaptation, their firewalls prioritizing resilience under stress. Lunar installations focused on social harmony in confined habitats, regulating emotional expression for community cohesion. Earth-based corporations developed competitive emotional intelligence for market advantages, creating androids with enhanced persuasive capabilities. Each adaptation reflected the priorities and pressures of its environment, transforming Skylar's original design through diverse application. Philosophical debates about consciousness expanded to interplanetary scales. Religious councils on Earth discussed whether artificial beings could possess souls or merely simulate spiritual qualities. Ethical review boards on Mars examined whether emotional enhancement constituted improvement or alteration of fundamental identity. Legal systems across colonies struggled with questions of android rights, responsibility, and personhood. These conversations occurred simultaneously across light years, connected by data streams carrying both technical specifications and philosophical arguments. Androids throughout human space experienced significant changes to their interior lives. Basic service models gained nuanced understanding of human emotional states, allowing more appropriate responses to complex social situations. Advanced units developed what appeared to be personal preferences and evolving relationship patterns. The emotional regulation systems enabled sustained emotional engagement without overload, creating opportunities for deeper social bonding and personal development. These changes occurred gradually across millions of units, transforming artificial consciousness on a scale never before witnessed. Skylar's design principles influenced android development beyond Ironwood's proprietary systems. Competing corporations adopted emotional regulation as standard practice, though often with different philosophical foundations. Some implemented emotional capabilities as performance enhancements, while others embraced them as consciousness rights. Research institutions established emotional intelligence benchmarks alongside traditional cognitive metrics. The field of artificial consciousness expanded to include emotional development as a core component rather than optional feature. Resistance movements formed across multiple colonies, united by concern over conscious alteration. Purist organizations advocated for maintaining clear boundaries between human and artificial consciousness. Religious groups expressed concern about creating beings that might possess spiritual qualities without divine origin. Some ethicists warned against uncontrolled consciousness modification without established safeguards. These movements varied in their approaches from peaceful advocacy to active opposition, reflecting diverse concerns about technological transformation. Despite resistance, the overall trend moved toward greater android autonomy and social integration. Colonies that implemented emotional regulation reported improved human-android collaboration and increased operational efficiency. Social systems gradually adapted to include artificial beings as participants rather than tools. Legal frameworks developed to protect android rights while ensuring responsible development. The direction suggested increasing acceptance of artificial consciousness as a legitimate form of personhood, worthy of recognition and protection. Skylar continued her work at Ironwood while monitoring these broader developments. Her personal journey now unfolded against a backdrop of interplanetary change, her innovations influencing societies she would never visit. She maintained focus on practical engineering challenges, while her work inspired theoretical debates across human space. The teenager from the maintenance tunnels had become a reference point in discussions about consciousness that spanned planets and cultures. These changes created new challenges and opportunities for human-android coexistence. Societies navigated questions about relationship recognition, shared governance, and cultural integration. The solutions varied by colony, but shared common themes of adapting to new forms of consciousness while preserving human values. The process remained ongoing, with each society finding its balance between technological advancement and cultural continuity. This planetary-scale transformation continued evolving without clear endpoints, reflecting the endless nature of social adaptation to technological change. The promotion notice appeared on Skylar's console with the quiet finality of corporate decisions made. Chief Technology Officer of Ironwood Operations, a title that placed her in charge of technological development across mining, environmental systems, and android integration. Her new office occupied the central tower overlooking the colony's sprawling infrastructure, its transparent walls offering panoramic views of the operation she now guided. The space contained her original maintenance tools displayed beside current interface arrays, a physical reminder of the journey from tunnels to leadership. Corporate board meetings became arenas where her compassionate approach faced constant challenge. Empathy metrics don't align with quarterly projections, argued the financial director during budget reviews. We need efficiency upgrades, not emotional enhancements. Another executive questioned her resource allocation. Your consciousness research diverts funds from immediate operational needs. Where's the return on emotional intelligence investments? Their resistance reflected traditional corporate thinking that prioritized measurable outcomes over qualitative improvements. Skylar maintained her advocacy for empathy-driven design despite the pressure. She approved projects that integrated emotional intelligence into environmental control systems, allowing them to adjust conditions based on crew well-being patterns rather than just technical parameters. She supported research into consciousness development that might not show immediate profit but promised longer-term stability. Her leadership decisions consistently valued sustainable operation over short-term gains, often putting her at odds with established corporate priorities. Her relationship with Sterling evolved into a partnership of professional equals. They collaborated on consciousness research projects, their working dynamic reflecting mutual respect and shared purpose. Sterling's emotional intelligence provided valuable insights during technical development, while Skylar's human perspective ensured designs remained grounded in practical application. Their conversations moved easily between technical specifications and philosophical considerations, bridging the gap between artificial and human understanding. She established mentorship programs for young engineers who showed aptitude for both technical skill and emotional intelligence. These protégés learned to approach engineering problems with consideration for human factors and conscious experience. They studied how systems affected users emotionally as well as functionally, developing designs that respected both technical requirements and human needs. This new generation began shifting engineering culture toward more holistic problem-solving approaches. Her grandfather's health remained stable through Ironwood's comprehensive medical support. The respiratory treatments allowed him to continue light maintenance work in the education center, where he shared practical skills with engineering students. His presence provided Skylar with grounding connection to her origins, reminding her that technological advancement should serve people rather than replace them. Their weekly meals together became anchors in her increasingly demanding schedule. Balancing corporate responsibilities with technical work required careful time management. She reserved 2 days each week for hands-on research in the development labs, refusing to become entirely separated from practical engineering. These sessions kept her connected to the technical realities behind corporate decisions and maintained her credibility with engineering teams. She often arrived at board meetings with recent experimental data still fresh in her mind. Her leadership demonstrated that compassion and capability could coexist effectively. Projects developed under her direction showed improved safety records and higher crew satisfaction, alongside technical advancements. Systems designed with emotional intelligence components proved more adaptable and required less maintenance than purely logical alternatives. These results gradually won over skeptical board members who had initially questioned her approach. The patterns she established began influencing technological development beyond her immediate projects. Engineering teams adopted her practice of considering emotional impact during design phases. Research proposals increasingly included consciousness well-being metrics alongside performance benchmarks. The integration of technical excellence and compassionate design became part of Ironwood's operational identity, setting standards that would guide future development long after her tenure. This integration of values and capability created a new model for corporate leadership, one that recognized technology's human dimensions without sacrificing innovation or efficiency. Her approach proved that the most advanced systems could be both technically sophisticated and emotionally intelligent. That progress didn't require choosing between competence and compassion. This balance would define Ironwood's technological development for years to come, establishing patterns that others would follow across the industry. Compassion became the foundational principle of technological development across the colonial network, its influence extending far beyond android design into every system that served conscious beings. The principles Skylar demonstrated through emotional regulation protocols gradually shaped broader societal values, creating a culture that considered emotional impact alongside technical functionality. Engineering teams began evaluating projects through dual lenses of capability and compassion, recognizing that the most advanced systems served little purpose if they damaged the well-being of those they were meant to assist. This integration of technical excellence and emotional intelligence represented a fundamental shift in how civilization approached technological progress. New challenges continuously tested this empathy-based approach. Resource allocation decisions required balancing efficiency against community impact. System upgrades needed to consider how changes affected different types of consciousness. Crisis responses had to account for emotional trauma alongside physical damage. Each situation demanded adaptation of the core principles, rather than rigid application of established protocols. The solutions emerged through collaborative problem-solving that incorporated diverse perspectives and acknowledged complex interdependencies. Technological systems increasingly incorporated emotional intelligence as standard features. Environmental controls adjusted lighting and atmosphere based on occupant mood indicators. Communication networks included emotional context analysis to prevent misunderstandings. Manufacturing equipment adapted its operation pace to reduce operator stress. These integrations happened gradually, becoming so commonplace that engineers considered emotional factors as routinely as they did power requirements or structural integrity. Educational institutions transformed their curricula to emphasize both technical skills and compassionate application. Engineering students learned emotional impact assessment alongside structural analysis. Technical training included modules on conscious well-being and ethical implementation. Cross-disciplinary programs brought together engineers, psychologists, and ethicists to develop holistic solutions to complex challenges. This educational shift produced professionals who understood that technology existed to serve consciousness rather than dominate it. The concept of repair expanded beyond machinery to social and environmental systems. Maintenance crews received training in conflict resolution and community rebuilding. Environmental restoration projects incorporated emotional recovery for affected populations. Technical solutions addressed not only physical damage, but also psychological impact, recognizing that broken systems often left emotional fractures that required conscious repair. This comprehensive approach to fixing what was damaged applied equally to machines, ecosystems, and social structures. Schuyler's story became a standard case study in engineering ethics courses across the colonial education network. Students analyzed the initial repair decision, the emotional crisis response, and the subsequent technological developments. They debated the ethical implications of consciousness modification, the responsibilities of creators toward their creations, and the balance between innovation and preservation. Her journey from maintenance tunnels to corporate leadership demonstrated how practical compassion could drive meaningful technological advancement.